Thanks and good evening again. We'll call the March 28th, 2023 Policy Committee meeting to order. Co-chair Zachary Epps. I will start with a roll call, starting with to my left, Mrs. Julie Hayward.
Present.
Ms. Jenny Lohman, starting with committee members.
Present.
Awesome. And we also recognizing, starting to my left, Mr. Joel Fishbein in attendance tonight, President and Mrs. Pam Henry, and also Ms. Leah Mulhern and Mr. Daniel Schultz, all board directors who are joining us here at the policy committee. With that roll call, we'll move forward for approval of the minutes from the February 28th, 2023 policy committee meeting.
Move to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Amazed that we'll move forward. All right, and that'll bring us to our old business piece of the agenda, and I'll hand it over to administration to start the presentation.
Thank you. On the old business, if you look at the agenda, the first policy is policy 113.2, behavior support, which was a second read at the last board meeting, and now it's up for adoption.
I know we had a first read for this, so I know we have some members of the public in attendance tonight, and so we could just, we're gonna open it up for more comments. I don't know if there's been substantive changes between second first read and now, but we can kind of just catch us up on what's been done.
Sure. So this policy 113.2 on behavior support is part of the special education package of policies that the board looked at over the last 2 months. There are 4 special education policies total. 3 of them have moved forward to adoption, but 113.2, based on some discussion at the committee level last month, went for a second first reading, and it's back for further consideration by the committee. The discussion last month focused primarily on the topic of seclusion in the policy. So there is some green language at the top of the screen here. Maybe down. So the changes that are seen in green on and red strikeout on the screen were made as a result of the discussion at last month's policy committee meeting. But the version that the committee is seeing is the reading that already went for a first reading. So no changes since the board meeting, but there were some changes since the last policy committee meeting. And in part, based on the discussion last month, we added the last 2 sentences here that talk about what seclusion really is as it relates to how it's utilized in Cheltenham. It's a de-escalation technique in a safe, quiet environment, utilized to allow students an opportunity to calm down when they're experiencing trauma or some sort of other behavior crisis in the classroom. So those are the changes that you'll see. The other recommendation that came from the committee last month was that the committee asked to clarify that seclusion that would be permitted by policy would be with staff supervision, not with or without staff supervision. And the only caveat that we built into that definition was in the event that there is an immediate threat to the student or staff, in which case the staff member would stand directly outside the room. And that room would be properly lit, properly supervised from immediately outside the door, and unlocked. I hope that gives some background. If there's questions, I can certainly address them. And Mr. Evans is also on the line this evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll open it up to comments from the board. Mr. Schultz.
So I have a couple questions, and for context for members of the public, I'm not a member of this committee. I wasn't in attendance, so I apologize if I'm asking questions that were already raised. What One question I have around the language that is up there now is what immediate threat would mean, and to what extent that would be open to interpretation in a way that could lead someone to declare that they, what is a threat here? My understanding is that the intended spirit of this language would be kind of to have seclusion be a last resort, really only if it's in the interest of physical safety. And I'm just a little bit worried that that's really hard to define, and we would want to make sure that it is defined in a way that doesn't open it up for too much interpretation, where seclusion is simply just used because, yeah. So I guess that's a question
Sure.
for you.
Sure. I can take that, and then if Mr. Evans has anything to add. So I think it's helpful to keep in mind currently the district's special education policies do not place any limitations on seclusion. There's no language around seclusion in the existing policies. Seclusion is a de-escalation technique, and it's utilized, and it's intended to be utilized very infrequently. When we put the language into the policy, we wrote it so that it would be only appropriate to be utilized in very limited circumstances. There are times when you talk about what would constitute an immediate threat. There may be a time when a student is experiencing a behavioral crisis, or is having a very challenging day and is turning desks upside down and throwing chairs across the room, or pulling shelves off the wall, and there's 25 kids in the room, and that child, despite other de-escalation techniques, has not responded. And for a temporary period of time, that student needs to be separated in a room by themselves, where they're not placing other students or staff members in harm's way. And that time when they're able to be in a room without other distractions or stimulating forces, gives them the opportunity to have a quiet area to calm down. That's the type of situation where, when I hear about seclusion, they're generally the circumstances that have led to it, where you have a child that's having a very hard time in a classroom, generally destroying property, turning rooms upside down, and there are other students in the immediate vicinity, and there needs to be a separation. Sometimes that means moving a student, if you can, safely to a room by itself, or sometimes it actually means pulling the other students out of the classroom and leaving the child in the classroom that they're in, so that other students are not, again, in harm's way. It's only meant to be where there's an immediate threat to other students, a staff member, or the student, him or herself. Neil, did I miss anything, or is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I'd like to apologize because I'm coming in and out. So if you don't hear me, I think you did a very good job of explaining that. The most important thing to understand is what we're doing is for the physical safety of the student or the other students and staff. That's the most important.
Okay. And I wonder if
when a student gets in those situations and there's a threat to it. Now, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought for sure.
No, I just wanted to say, it's the most important things we look at is the safety and well-being of the student, the other students, and the staff member. If it gets to that situation, that's where we would look at a de-escalation process of using a seclusion room. Because in some of these situations, like Mr. Diaz said, that chairs can be thrown and desks uplifted and other things and objects in the classroom, and we want to make sure that everybody's safe.
Nice, so thank you both for those explanations. And the question, I guess, is how much interpretation is this language leaving? And I don't know if there's any way to avoid it while also having a clause that allows it at all. But I know that the goal needs to be to allow it for extraordinary circumstances, which was in the previous language, correct? But So like, that's another example of what is an extraordinary circumstance, and how can we have the policy convey what, what passes that bar?
So with any policy, sometimes it's hard to write language that will definitively address every single circumstance. So there's always a certain level of subjectivity. That said, if you look on the screen and you can see the specific conditions that have to be met under the policy for seclusion to be appropriate, there are several of these conditions are very restrictive, are inherently very restrictive. So to answer your question, I would say there's not a whole lot of subjectivity, because we've put as many limitations and wrote them as objectively as we can to make this a technique that's utilized only as a last resort. This language is very much limiting language. So keep in mind, we went from a policy that had no restrictions at all, but in policy around seclusion, whereas the language that's in this current policy limits seclusion except in extremely rare circumstances where there's a threat to the health and safety of the student or others.
Thank you. Another question I had was around, right now, I don't see language that talks about how often a student should be regularly interacted with or looked at or checked up on to make sure that they're not, that's the seclusion itself is not creating additional distress. And, we don't want situation. So I don't know what an appropriate cadence would be, but something on the order of every 5 minutes or every 1 minute or whatever, I don't know, but.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that we were recommending that it would be under adult supervision.
Okay.
So there's always,
There's
constant supervision, if not in the room,
Right outside.
at the door looking in. And Mr. Evans, maybe if you can share in your experience, I know it's hard because every situation is unique, but a seclusion is not intended to be a 2-hour long, event. It's a very, very temporary period of time. Do you have any history in terms of how long these events generally last?
As you said, it's case by case. I rarely do they go over more than I'd say 30 minutes. Rarely. Usually the students can be de-escalated before then. The other thing that I think that the board needs to understand is once something like this happens, the nurse is always called and contacted to make sure that as far as physically that the student is okay, and also that the IP team would then consider whether we need to conduct another IP meeting to relook at the positive behavior support plan.
I may have more questions, but thanks for letting me ask some.
Yeah, we can just go now. As long.
Thank you. I want to say I do appreciate the attempt to modify the language in this policy to make it appear that seclusion will be used in only extreme circumstances and with adult supervision and for the consideration of the safety of the student and the staff and the other students. That all being said, as long as we permit seclusion in this district, I will not be voting for this policy. I feel like that we are moving backwards if we allow this to happen in our district. We talk a lot of good talk. We need to walk some good walk here. We need to make sure that all kids belong, are engaged, and we seek justice for all of our students. That's the vision that we just adopted. Cheltenham is a community where all students know they belong, engage and excel in their learning experience, and are prepared to act as champions of social justice. I believe that if we adopt a reactionary policy that permits seclusion in any circumstance, and even if we call it by a different name, a calm down room, whatever you want to call it, a quiet room, Involuntary seclusion is antiquated. We have members of our own congressional delegation who are co-sponsoring bills at the federal level that would prohibit involuntary seclusion. We should be doing the same in this district. I appreciate the fact that it's a difficult situation when kids are acting out. I understand that. My mom was a teacher for 27 years. I heard she was a public school teacher in a very diverse district. I heard many stories about what happened when kids acted out. I appreciate that. What we know is we can do better. We can do better. I provided information, SEEK has provided information about how we can in fact do better and what we can do differently in order to address student behavior. Seclusion is not a positive behavior support. You can frame it as a de-escalation strategy, but what it often ends up as is kids in tears, probably adults in tears, and a very hard feeling between a family, a child, and a school. And I don't mean to be difficult. I know the administration likes it when we go along with what they're recommending. But in this case, I just cannot go along with this. I really can't. I've seen as an advocate for kids with disabilities, too many instances where seclusion and restraints have gone terribly wrong. And as a school board member who was elected to represent all of the constituents in this district, I cannot in good conscience vote for a policy that includes seclusion in it. What I could vote for is, and we're also, the other thing I should say is that we're also making these decisions about these policies in a complete data vacuum. We do not know how many kids with IEPs are secluded every year. That information hasn't been shared with us. We don't know how many kids with IEPs are restrained every year. That information hasn't been shared with us. We don't know the gender breakdown of those numbers, and we don't know the racial breakdown of those numbers. The other thing we could pretty quickly find out how many kids with IEPs are suspended and expelled every year. That's pretty easily available public data. But we're also making these decisions in this vacuum. We don't receive the school-wide positive behavior support data. We don't know how well it's working in each building. We're being asked to make policy decisions based on information that we don't have. So that's the other reason why I feel very uncomfortable supporting the use of seclusion as whatever you want to call it, a de-escalation strategy, a safety strategy, or whatever kind of strategy, because there's just been too many incidents where it goes terribly wrong. Same with restraint for that matter. And I might add actually that our policy does prohibit the use of prone or face down restraints already. So I would, that's how my kind of, so I guess what I'll just sum up is that my overall concern about all of this policy and this behavior support is that seclusion isn't a way to support a child's behavior. It's a way to make things easier for adults in the moment. To actually address what's driving a child's behavior challenges takes a lot of time. I shared articles with the board about some programs that have been used with great success in other school districts, in schools that serve only kids with disabilities, actually, with challenging disabilities that have been used with great success in those schools. And it takes a huge mind shift. It takes a belief that all children mean all children, and not, all children except for those kids who act out in emotional support classrooms, or except for those kids who act out in autistic support classrooms. All means all. And so that's the other thing is, this is a mindset change that has been a very long time coming in our district, and it's still coming. We seem to embrace diversity and inclusion and belonging for all kids, except for those kids for whom it's difficult to embrace it. And we need to do better. That's just my opinion as one board member.
I didn't notice we skipped over you. We could go down the line. Oh, you're good.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So one of the questions I had is, what is the process for who determines imminent injury? And what is within the current seclusion framework? Who determines who needs to be contacted? What de-escalation techniques get used even before a child is in a secluded type of environment?
So wherever the child is, with whatever teacher they're with at the time, has access to their IEP. And that's the individual who's at that time responsible for the student. Now, as I understand, and any of the members from the admin team can correct me. I know, but
So, I'll just explain what I'm doing. We would like to be able to know what members of the public are in attendance virtually. So that was all.
Generally, when student conduct rises to a level that there needs to be a seclusion, additional assistance has been sought or is being sought for the student. That could mean an extra professional. It could mean the nurse. It could mean a number of people, but generally it's a scenario where additional adult support is going to be needed. And that responsibility would fall on the classroom teacher that's responsible for the student at that time.
That's all the questions I have for you.
Dr. Smith has her hand up, so we can,
Okay,
at whenever the right time is.
we can take it, but I don't want to make assumptions. So Dr. Smith, did you want to respond to a question or add to a response?
Yes, I just wanted to add to Mr. Diazio's response about the classroom teacher being the main point of contact when some of these experiences take place. I wanted to also share that in addition to the IEP information, teachers are tasked with keeping information on other students to monitor their triggers and monitor any repeat behaviors that they've seen that have been antecedents to some of the more egregious behavior. And they've been directed to contact an administrator to get more support and more help before they make any definitive decisions, with the exception, of course, if someone is throwing a chair or throwing any projectiles where someone could be harmed. We are asking teachers to directly involve administrators, the school counselor, and other staff before any final decisions are made. So it's not just on the teacher per se.
And all of the district's policies, as we review them, we look at every one through the lens of how do we make this policy better reflect our student discipline, our philosophy on student discipline, our philosophy on classroom management, our policy on equity. And so certainly when staff are trained on the new policies that come out, they're trained with the goal in mind that we shouldn't be relying on seclusion. Seclusion is not a desired outcome. Positive supports, positive reinforcement are the desired approach. And they are the approach that, again, that staff are being trained to consistently implement. When those measures fail, though, in rare instances, staff is going to be looking for direction on how they handle those situations. And when you do have emergency situations where health and safety is implicated, if techniques are taken away from staff, the response of staff is going to be to call for help, whether that be call 911, call the principal to do those things, because at some point in time, there is no other measure left to take in every single case. I think, to Ms. Lohman's point, I think that the goal is a worthy one, and I think this policy moves 99% in that direction. Again, keep in mind where we're at now is by policy, no limitations, no restriction, no guidelines on seclusion, to a policy that talks about seclusion and the very, very limited circumstances when it's permitted. As I prepared for this meeting, I was trying to come up with some other examples of policy decisions that the board has made in recent years. And we took a hard look at the student discipline policy a couple years ago. And of course, we had the goal of eliminating exclusionary discipline, right? And we wanted to see, in an ideal world, we want to see no suspensions and no expulsions. And we would want our positive approach to discipline to be working in 100% of the cases. But it doesn't always immediately work in 100% of the cases. And the board never said, never in a suspension. When we looked at the MOU with our police and we looked at our law enforcement policy, the board was pretty clear. We wanted to get as close to zero of referrals to law enforcement as we could. But the board never said, we'll never call law enforcement, because there can always be that one circumstance where you've tried everything else and that's the only tool that's left. It's not very dissimilar with this policy, where a very appropriate goal, and as Ms. Lohman noted, many public education entities have that goal in mind of trying to reduce and eliminate seclusion. And to that point, that takes time, it takes training, it takes resources, it takes changes to your programmatic structure that I'm not sure we're ready to move forward with now. That's certainly something that the administrative team could speak more to, but we're trying to, what we tried to do with this policy, recognizing that the board's goal would be to try to eliminate seclusion, was to write the language so that it's almost never appropriate to utilize, and it's utilized in extremely rare circumstances. That was the goal that we tried to accomplish with the language that you're seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein.
Actually, Ms. Lohman said much of what I was thinking about. I do have a question that perhaps Ms. Lohman can answer. I obviously have a goal of zero seclusions also, and I think that part of this discussion is informed by some recent revelations of overuse of seclusion, so that zero seclusion seems like a really worthy and important goal. But what happens if there's danger? Like, what is the proposed solution in that framework? I'm just
Right, no, I understand that, and I think, as Mr. Diazio just said, that response requires training and improvement, and time, and there are ways to respond. There's this, Steve pointed it out already, it's mentioned in some of the things I had sent to the board. It's called collaborative and proactive solutions model, also called comfort and control. You need to train your staff so that, and provide them with the materials almost, so that if a child is presenting with some challenging behaviors, the staff is prepared to remain calm and then have things that will keep them protected. And as one of the articles I sent, some staff don't believe in that approach, and they left the one school. So one school mentioned they take staff leave because they didn't believe that approach was a viable solution. So, but that is the goal. I understand, yes, we're concerned what will happen in the meantime, and I know that the only way I would feel comfortable with is some assurance that we are actually looking at those sorts of approaches, moving forward. And language matters too. I mean, people who are really who who are looking to change children's behavior, they talk about it in terms of it's a form of communication. So that when children present with challenging behaviors, it's not egregious. It's a form of communication that especially younger children, that they are not able to communicate their feelings in a way that would otherwise be appropriate. So they throw a chair. So I don't know, that's just my thought about that, but I think it is true, it takes time. It takes time.
We actually, Dr. We do have two last members as chair I hold, but we do have two last. At least Ms. Hayward, you had some comments. And Dr. Scriven, if you don't mind, we'll just go through and then, yes.
Unless did you want to respond directly to this brief? Okay. All right. So I definitely appreciate the conversation around the table. I think it's helpful. Ms. Logan, I appreciate all the information that you provided to the board. Mr. Diazio, I really do appreciate also the context in which we are really, trying to address this issue thoughtfully. I definitely appreciate the input and the information that you've provided to us as well. I think, though, Mr. Fishbein has asked a very critical question in terms of, in the new, what would we do if there was imminent danger to a student, staff, or community member, for that matter, who may be at the time. And what I understand is that we're not there yet. I definitely would want us to get to the point where we don't use seclusion or restraints as a way of behavior support, because I don't think it's behavior support. What I would like to see in this policy is a couple of things. Until we have in place appropriate training, appropriate identification of best practices as alternatives to address situations, particularly when we're talking about immediate and imminent harm or injury to a student or staff or others. I would propose that as part of the purpose statement that we have, the board supports the goal of moving towards no restraints and seclusion as, behavior modification or support mechanisms. I'd like to see the data. I think someone raised the question about the data. I think that would be important since we're moving, in my opinion, to no restraints, no seclusion policy. We want to see where we are today, where we are next year, where we are 6 months from now. Because I do think that training is critically important, even with the current policy in place. And so I think having the data in terms of the numbers of students who've been restrained or secluded, both students with disabilities and without disabilities, quite frankly, but having that data now and being able to move in the direction of having reduction in that data over time, with the understanding that, at least from one board member, that it would be our goal to move to alternative forms of appropriate behavior support that's different than restraints with seclusion. So I think we can get there. I think we can add language to the policy that if the board's will is to go in that direction, we can add language to the policy that moves us in that direction and holds us all accountable for looking at the data going forward. That would be what I would propose, because I do think training to move in that direction is critically important. Training is important now. Training is going to really be important when we're looking at other alternative techniques for handling. And I'm talking about really what we're talking about, the really limited instances where we're hopefully using, not hopefully, but that we're using seclusion or restraint. Really, we're talking about, in my opinion, immediate injury or imminent harm to a student or others. So in terms of translating that to language in the policy, I don't have any specific language to add, except that that's kind of what I'm thinking as one board member. to move us in the direction of no restraint seclusion when we have in place really best practice alternative measures where people are really, staff is really trained on those techniques.
There are also some policies in the board's policy manual that by policy, they get looked at periodically. So the policy on wellness gets looked at every 3 years because approaches towards wellness change. The policy on bullying gets reviewed every 3 years. That's a legal requirement. But if sort of to what Mrs. Haywood said, and also to Ms. Lohman's point about assurances being in the policy and making sure that the board is receiving good data, the board could also consider building in a policy requirement that every certain number of years, this policy be looked at, which would then kind of set up that discussion every 2 or 3 years to look at the data from a school year or two to see whether you're progressing towards the ultimate goal. So I just put that out there as another option.
Yeah, I mean, just in kind of response to that, I mean, if we're moving in that direction, we may want to look at the policy more frequently if we're getting the data on an annual basis, and we can see from year to year if we're really moving in that direction. So I think 3 years may be way too long.
I don't want to get too far with that. Mr. Burdell Williams, did you have something to add at this moment?
Yeah, I do. And it's really in the essence of what Ms. Haywood was sharing. That going to a policy that excludes seclusion exclusively today, I don't know if our staff are prepared to do that. And for me, I do want to ensure that the training is appropriate, that we are tracking the success of that training. And I think that there's an important amount, very information that's been shared from our friends at SEEK just in regards to subject matter experts who could support us in this regard. I'd like to see that engagement. In terms of the policy itself, I'm thinking about things that come to mind after doing my own research in terms of the actual space in and of itself. Everyone knows me, I'm on the facilities committee, but also professionally spend time talking about facilities and their condition on a daily basis. And so for me, if in fact we agree as a board to move toward a zero seclusion experience, I would support that. And in between time, I'm also very interested in the quality of the spaces that we're doing this in. I believe the verbiage that is in the policy currently is very vague. The room says proper lighting and ventilation and remain unlocked. I mean, that's a bathroom at the end of the day. And I'm not sharing that out of disrespect for the language in and of itself, but I believe that there is an appropriate description of what the space should be that would at least fit some basic safety type security needs that I'm not sure is necessarily outlined here, that I would want to see again as we progress toward a zero seclusion experience. I do think that we can achieve that as one board member. And as with anything else, it will take some amount of progress and effort for us to get there. I don't think we have to have seclusion at all. And I'm concerned currently, yes, with the practice and how we're using it, as what I think a lot of folks in this room are. And I'm also thinking about the space in and of itself, and that knowing the condition, knowing our schools in general, knowing the buildings. I'm just curious, I'm not going to say that I want to know right now, but I think it's important for us to understand that via some type of expanded description in the policy, and also similar to the reports we hear at facilities that have these amazing pictures, as well as the last educational affairs meeting where we saw the space. I really want to know what that actually looks like in comparison to some standard. Is there a standard?
and what is it specifically, and are we meeting it? Dr. Scriven, you alluded to that at the Educational Affairs meeting, that we would do a review or an audit of our spaces. I'm very interested in that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for all the energy that's been shared in the room of that.
Thanks, Mr. Murdell Williams. So I didn't want to get too much further from, I recognize our superintendent did want to act. So before we do another round of board comments, Dr. Scriven.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do another round. I think the path forward is very simple. This is called continuous improvement. It's very clear from the inception when I came here as superintendent that our special ed department was not where you as a board desired it to be. I've heard that from the community. I experience it with parents, which I speak to, that we are not where we need to be as superintendent. I acknowledge that here at this table. We're going through a complete revamp of special education. We have hired almost a completely new team and are in the process of hiring a new director for special education. I think individuals need to understand process. I understand the end result. I understand everything that was shared here in terms of the ideal state. I don't want to move but so far, so fast, until I have the individual who's going to really be the one that I'm holding accountable for the process in place. That's why I'm expediting the whole process of getting a special ed director in place. Mr. Evans has been outstanding, but he's interim. There's only so much that he can do as interim, being fully transparent. I've identified and recognized the fact that we need to do an audit of special ed holistically, but starting with our autism support and our emotional support programs. We can give updates on that. I agree entirely that data should be furnished with regard to what is our current state around seclusion. I'm not trying to rush this policy through at all. Not at all. I think we should take as long as we need to take until what you need as a board is provided and you feel comfortable with making an informed decision. But we need a policy. We can't operate without a policy. I could care less what the policy looks like, but as superintendent, I'm not comfortable moving forward without having something in place. And if that means we need to have more detailed dialogue and I need to pull in more experts in the field or whatever that case may be, then that's what I will do. But to go from 0 to 60 makes no sense. That's setting us up for disaster because we're not even currently operating with the proficiency that we should be with what's been in place for I don't know how long, but it's been in place and it's not working. So we need to revisit and really have some concrete recommendations once we've gone through these reviews, which will guide and inform incrementally what do we need to do. I agree. Every year, I'm fine with that. You can every 6 months, every 3 months. I'm not going to, but I'm just saying, if that's the need, then we have the power to make that happen. So I'm fine with that. But to continue to do this is not going to get us anywhere because we don't have all the information at this current state to really make an informed decision. I'm being honest. I can continue to listen to opinions and points of views and perspectives, which is healthy. But I don't think anything, the audience is only going to reaffirm some of the points that Ms. Loman has already made from the standpoint of C. I have Ms. Gallagher here. who I've had contact with already today with inappropriate incident that her child was exposed to. I mean, so I'm very clear. And I just wanted to articulate that. And not defensive at all. I want to get this right. I want to get this right, just like you guys do as a board. So let's not rush this process. I feel like, you know, we're coming like a decision on this has to be made now. And I really, from one voice, don't feel that is warranted. I think we need to bring some more things to the table on this topic specifically.
So let me, can I ask
Yeah,
a question?
please.
So to that end, and I agree with everything that I've heard from you. If seclusion is currently happening, and I'm saying if, knowing that it is happening, what kind of guidelines and guardrails can be put in place so that it's operating under the spirit of what I see here?
Right.
In terms of it being in rare, exceptional situations, and that there is a process in place to, at least for now, know that it's being done appropriately.
Well-
And the student is not being harmed.
And that's why we were trying to get to this point,
Okay.
because there were no guardrails in the previous policy. So this was our effort to at least put some guardrails in place around the current policy on seclusion. This is, from my perspective, the first step, but I agree with Mr. Riddell Williams and others here that the potential to implement other practices is definitely what we should strive to. But we're not there yet because I've got to assess the current state and make sure current practices are being implemented with the fidelity in which they should be, which I already know is not happening. So I would say if we remain with the current policies, that would be problematic as well. We have to make incremental steps towards the ideal state that we're aspiring to get to. And that's why I was saying, let's increase the frequency in which we revisit this policy, because nothing is etched in stone for an extended period of time. I wasn't being sarcastic with that. I was being very sincere in terms of if we look at 3 months, 6 months, annually, what have you. But I think we need to have that flexibility because this is going to be something that we're going to have to revisit pretty fluidly as we strive to get it right.
So I still saw some hands, which may be in response to what you were saying. Again, I don't want to make assumptions. So we'll do the opposite direction. We'll start with Ms. Hayward.
I am okay.
Dr. Scriven, thank you very much for that. From a pragmatic perspective, given our current state, what do you think are the appropriate, well, maybe it's appropriate to put together a AR that supports the when seclusion or restraints are used, who's contacted. Dr. Smith offered, additional information in terms of the nurse being called. So there seem to be some procedural steps that are in place that should be followed, that we currently, or at least in practice, utilizing. So maybe it would be helpful to have at least in support of what's currently going on in the interim until we move in that direction with the additional data, with the additional evaluation, with the additional research on best practice, so that there's some at least guidance with respect to who makes the decision about imminent danger or harm, who's contacted, who is, looking in on the students, that a locked room includes not a room that's held shut by an adult or any other person. Things like that I think may be helpful. And then obviously, even for the short term, having the appropriate training so that people are informed that these are the practices that need, or these are the steps that need to be taken in the event of imminent danger of harm.
I would say, I would agree. I would ask this of the board. Do we have to wait until a policy meeting to revisit? I think we need to have the flexibility, whether it be a legislative meeting, and whenever, where we can update some of those requests, put that in place.
Yeah, I'm not
And
down
then-
to having
and
a
then-
policy.
Yeah, but we just need to have the flexibility to address this in a timely manner, which makes sense.
Mhm.
So I concur with everything that you just stated. And for us, it would just be creating the next opportunity to revisit it again with those updates.
Mr. Fishman?
You have something you wanted to say, you're keeping quiet, you might have something to say before I go.
I'll hold for now. Yeah. I'll hold for now.
It was, for me, refreshing to hear the kind of accountability that you just heard from Dr. Scriven. The idea that we have to approach this incrementally seems unfortunate, but obvious to me, because currently there's no restraints. We need to change that today, like now, as soon as the next time we can vote on a policy. There needs to be a policy that provides guardrails like are in this version, or perhaps something edited to make it even more stringent, an AR that puts some real parameters around what it looks like when it happens. Certainly, we need to know how often it's happening, what are the antecedents to when it happens, what was in place that didn't work before it happened. I have personal experience with this, and it is something that one would never wish to have their son have to experience, and we need to keep this as infrequent as possible. But as my first question sort of indicated, I do see there could be very rare times when it's necessary. It surprises me, frankly, that the children who are having these behaviors are not, the ones that I know of have one-on-ones, and then that's one way to eliminate or limit the amount of times seclusion would be necessary, because one-on-one would de-escalate right away. If that's not in place, maybe we should be looking at that for the IEP interventions when appropriate. So that's just a thought that comes to mind, but the idea of an incremental approach is absolutely necessary right now, because I don't think we have what we need to have zero tomorrow.
Ms. Henry had made a comment prior. So I'll move forward to Ms. Loman. I think I saw her hand as well.
Well, I know, I have,
If I thought I saw it go up.
I do have something to say, but
It matters.
I appreciate the fact that this has to be an incremental approach. I guess my concern is that not as a board member, but first is what used to be called snag. And I know, Dr. Scriven, you don't like to hear the past because you weren't involved with it, and I appreciate that.
No, but I always appreciate historical context.
Yeah,
Seriously.
snag, now see. And we've had superintendent after superintendent after superintendent, now after superintendent, I sure hope they're different, come in and say to us, special ed is a huge problem and we need to fix it. Special ed is a huge problem. I sat in this room when Dr. Marseille said, the special ed program in this district keeps me up at night. Said Dr. Rumfeld. Here we are, again, talking about the same things over and over again, approving settlement agreements after settlement agreements after settlement agreements after settlement agreements. And at the end of the day, it's children, and I know we all believe this, and I know we all feel it, but I don't know as one board member how to make a change, and that's what upsets me so much. Is that I don't know how to make it better for the kids whom it impacts. And I know we're concerned about the teachers that it impacts and the staff that it impacts. But at the end of the day, it's little kids, kindergartners, fourth graders. How can we make it better? And it's white kids and it's black kids and it's boys. It's mostly boys. Maybe it's mostly boys. And we present ourselves as such a progressive district that that embraces diversity, and we love our diversity, and we want all children to feel like they belong. But when you're a kid with behavior problems, a kid with egregious behaviors, disrupts the classroom, throws chairs, then you're the enemy. It feels like you're the enemy of the people. And I don't know how we get past that. And I'm just hoping that we can get past that somehow. Because when I see our strategic plan, I don't feel like it encompasses certain kids. And that makes me really sad. And that's not a very board member-like thing to say, but and I don't know where else to express it, because we never get to talk about these issues outside policy meetings. We never get to have a chance to have a real discussion about what's really going on in our district. It comes up in bits and pieces and drabs and dribs at policy meetings, sometimes at ed affairs, but never a real honest discussion about how we feel the trajectory of our district is going for all kids. We get some data on limited basis, and it's not clear to me sometimes how we're supposed to evaluate things. And this policy feels like the perfect example of that. How are we supposed to evaluate what's really happening? So we don't know. And we're going to make these decisions. And that's all I'm going to stop. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Well, I want to respond. I feel that everything that I have proposed is the path forward to responding to what you just articulated. I, with eyes wide open, know what I've stepped into as superintendent of Cheltenham. I knew every issue before I even applied for the job, because I've been a part of this community, even not directly, but indirectly, for over 40 years. My parents have been in this community. This is a very fractured community on many levels, based on the expectation of things that we say we stand for, represent. But when you really, and I have to say it, look at the data, there's a very clear disconnect, because the disproportionality on many levels just paints a different picture. What I have recognized and what I've tried to demonstrate is that everything is a process. I know where I want us to go, but I can't go alone. That's not good leadership. I'm going to be very honest. I know your heart. I've spoken to Zeke, I've spoken to others. I know the desire, but for me to sit here and say that we can just go from where we are to the ideal state that you're proposing would cause more damage than what you're currently experiencing, to be quite honest. Because if individuals, one, are not vested, do not have the buy-in, and are not trained and properly prepared for the change, we have chaos. I don't ascribe to chaos. And that's why I'm trying to slow things down, demonstrating that my collaborative spirit and my willingness is there. But I need the partnership, I need the trust to move it forward. And it's not going to happen overnight. We're disillusional if we think it's going to happen overnight. But if I can show you incremental growth towards the desired state, then let's celebrate that and keep moving to where we're trying to get. It's that simple. But we can't do it if we're not functioning as one on a united front. I said this last Friday. We had a very real conversation about what happened at the last Ed Affairs meeting. And they were very receptive to what I had to say, and they've already responded in terms of their level of understanding. And I'm trying to reciprocate from that standpoint. But it's going to take a partnership, and it's going to take us a little time, and it's going to allow you, or you're going to have to give me the space to do what's necessary. And I know that's hard because you've been here before. You don't have a new superintendent from the standpoint of experience. It's over 30 years. My whole experience has prepared me for this opportunity. That is why I wanted to do it here at Shell. It's that simple. I'll say that over and over again. That's why the board selected me, because I resonated with them through the process. Let me do the work, come alongside as we do the work. It's that simple. It's not simple. Because the human dynamic, it does. The human dynamic, the heart, the passion, the frustration, the disappointment, all of that. Because humans are not perfect, we're flawed. But we need the grace to keep trying to do what we need to do for our students. This is one aspect of many aspects that need to be addressed, but they're all just as important. So I hope that helps, Ms. Sloan. I'm here to work with you and the team.
It does, and I appreciate all of that, Dr. Smith, I do. I think for me, it's hard as one board member. Like I said, we don't really have these discussions this way.
Understood.
You know,
Well, let's create the opportunity to have them. I mean, that's my whole thing. If things that we've been doing are bringing us the same result, then let's do some things differently, right? So
I would
you
love
guys
that.
let me know. Let me know what you want it to look like. I'm in it. I'm here.
Meetings, everything.
I'm repeating.
I will try to be good. I want to thank you, Dr. Scriven, and thank you to Ms. Lohman for your vulnerability. I know that it's not easy to do when we're very passionate about something, and you work there, and we appreciate it. And I just want to thank the members of the public and SEEK and Ms. Lohman as well for any experiences that were shared, documents, articles. As one board member, that was very helpful in giving me a wider foundation of knowledge. I want to, there's not much more that I can add or want to add at this time, other than it was not clear to me until this very meeting, just in the last half an hour, 40 minutes, that we were looking at this as a stepping stone, if you will, to forward movement. But the idea of, as Ms. Haywood, suggested, perhaps language in the purpose of the policy. I appreciate all the discussion about, this is not our goal of where we want to be in 1 year or 2 years or 5 or 10 years is not what is currently in the policy, is what it says. But our goal is something bigger and better and more equitable for all of our students. And so that, as one person, makes me feel that I have a better understanding of kind of where we're going, because that was not clear to me.
It happened organically.
And
It
that's
was
great.
not. But I want to be, and that's how things should be. Like what you just articulated was not part of the agenda that happened through this meeting. So you wouldn't have known ahead of time.
I mean, okay,
Is the point that
I
I'm
wanted
trying
to
to
be clear
make.
that if I missed something.
No, you did not. I did not miss
Well, then I
anything.
appreciate it even more.
Yeah.
Right. It is that collective effort, that we don't often really get really into in deep sometimes. So I do appreciate where the conversation has taken us. And I don't have any other questions at this time.
Yes. Thank you, everyone who spoke after me very eloquently. I would like to bring it back to the actual policy now that all this, with this having all been covered. I have some what might seem like pedantic language questions, with the assumption that based on what I just heard, there is true value in moving some form of policy forward sooner than later / as soon as possible that do add more restrictions than the current policy, which has absolutely no restrictions. And so in that spirit, with the language that is proposed, I had a clarifying question around, I see that in the definitions section, we define clear and present danger. And that is getting closer to kind of when I was opening about like, how do we know what a threat is? I mean, that's more explicit than a more generic immediate, determined to be an immediate threat. I wonder if we could replace immediate threat to reference that defined term, or if we don't want that to be the bar.
The only comment I would have to that is clear and present danger. As I read the definition, measures harm, and that's not always an intent, directly or indirectly, of a student who ultimately requires a seclusion. It's not always about an intent to harm, but I'd have to look and see where else in the policy clear present danger is utilized to see, because that was a definition that was added. So we're using clear and present danger in the physical restraints. That was actually, Ms. Lohman, I actually think you helped us formulate that definition before the policy even came to the policy committee the first time.
Yeah, that's from state regulation.
Understood. At the very least, at the end of seclusion, we do reference the phrase, and this is in the context of when a staff member should be within the same room. We say immediate threat, and I wonder if that could be clear and present danger.
I don't see why not.
My other question, and this might speak more towards the development of an AR, because for many reasons, having it be in a policy would be, but things around who the decision makers are. I think Ms. Henry, you had asked that question, and right now the answer is the teacher, which makes sense if it's an emergent situation. You can't take 10 minutes to go consult with, a principal or building level leader. However, it strikes me that if this is currently intended to be a very rare circumstance, and a circumstance that is rooted in de-escalation of something that is urgent, once a student is in a calm down room or a seclusion room, at that point, maybe saying we need to get approval from a building level administrator or somebody who has been more formally trained. I just wanted to throw that out there as a concept. So in other words, the initial call to begin the process.
Let me jump in.
Yeah.
Just real quick. These things happen so fast that, so this is what I would, let me not, because this is
fair.
Let us put together the AR.
That's all I'm getting at. Yeah. So that I'll stop talking about what the AR, but an AR that speaks to
I'm clear.
who, and then also follow up and reporting. And if this shouldn't happen often, we should be able to, not just through a data record of the number of incidents, but the context of the incident and an explanation as to why the adults determined that this was what needed to occur.
Yeah, I'm going to pull the data for you guys. We're going to put together an AR, and we're going to revisit this as soon as we can. And that's what I'm.
Yeah. And so then my question then is, what are next steps and when would those occur? And I think that might be a question for the chair.
And we do have, and so we've heard in terms of a timely manner, creating opportunities to follow up this conversation.
We should have to report the next legislative meeting, April 18th. We're off a week. Or even if we make it a part of our 18th legislative meeting, that helps with timeline that I'm talking that if not sooner, we could do it the week prior, but, public
Yeah.
meeting, that would be the next best opportunity to have that as a.
So I appreciate that. We do have members of the public present and attending virtual, who would like to speak. So as we move forward to that, I will add, as approaching this, I do think of our role as a board, ensuring that schools are well run. We are not here to run the schools. And what we are hearing from all directions, there's not both sides. What we're hearing from all directions is that Cheltenham School District needs to be a place where all students belong. And we all agree on that, and there's been some commitments here. I think of the example that was shared, where in one of the articles that it was someone actually on the edge of a pillar, right? And some de-escalation techniques that were used, not seclusion, right? And I think of a school district that still had seclusion in their policy, but looked at the data frequently and said, we need to see this number go down. And if this number is not going down, there's some things we need to do differently. And so I hear commitment to doing that. And I hear our community saying, we're gonna hold you to that as well. And so I hear our administration saying they need something. They need something in place to provide, which our policy is supposed to do, provide some guardrails in these situations while we continue that conversation. And so, again, I take that in the frame of, we're hearing the people who are responsible for running the schools. What are they asking for to be best equipped? And how do we set some policy to set those conditions? And so that's where I'll stop. We've had some conversations previously about this. I did see Mr. Evans, I saw your hand was raised. I do want to move to the public. Mrs. Haywood?
Yeah, just a procedural question.
Yeah.
So this is a repeat first read. We've made some recommendations that may get into policy language that we can add to the policy. We also are waiting for an AR. So procedurally, if we're using the legislative meeting as the next opportunity to review an AR, to review a revised policy, then that would be kind of in lieu of the policy committee formal meeting, which is fine with me. Would that then come back? I don't know if we have a second first read. I mean, like, whatever procedurally it's called, I don't really care, but.
It sounds like we have at least a few changes that we want to make. The purpose statement, maybe to the physical space, to Mr. Verdell Williams' comment, and maybe some language around a commitment to training. So the policy would then move to a first reading. It's basically a new first reading because the policy will have been revised again and reset forward. A repeat first reading is when the same policy just loops for another meeting. We're going to make some changes here. So it would, as long as the committee's comfortable with it, the revisions that I heard would be incorporated and presented as a first reading at the April legislative meeting.
Okay.
Procedurally, I'm wondering whether the substantive things that we talked about tonight are just improvements so that we can get to a second read, so that we can get on the books faster, so that we have a policy with guardrails rather than a policy with none. I'm just thinking out loud.
Meaning for proposed for adoption.
Right.
Not necessarily.
A new first read.
And then we do another first read.
The training and the space issues can be addressed in an AR. The policy sets the floor. The AR could go into more detail about what that looks like.
I just want to be very clear though, this district was not without guidance. The language from these policies, except for the seclusion piece, which is not in state regulation at all, comes directly from state regulation, directly. So presumably, there was guidance. It's not in the district's policy, but this language is pretty much tracks, like I said, except for the seclusion piece, which is not in state law at all. It tracks, what has been in existence for a good 20 some odd years.
I think we know anecdotally that seclusion does take place.
Yeah.
And this limits it. So.
Right, no, I appreciate
yeah,
that.
I
Yeah, but
agree.
yeah, I'm just
I'm
saying,
agreeing.
just generally, like the restraint piece and all of that, that's been in state regs for,
That I completely agree with.
yeah.
So I think procedurally, I actually agree with Mr. Fishbein that makes sense. I mean, I think we can capture a lot of what we talked about tonight in an AR, which Dr. Scriven is committed to, have administration put together in preparation for the legislative meeting. So that then provides procedurally an opportunity for the board to adopt a revised policy with an accompanying AR at the legislative meeting.
Clarifying question, we could also, though, in addition to adopting that policy, go on to again revisit a future draft of this policy and just adopt another new policy in next months that has additional relevant purpose, et cetera.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to mention that.
So it sounds like we've resolved.
Yes, thank
So let's move forward to hear from comments from the community on policy 113.2. We'll start with those in the room, and then do we have anyone? And as a reminder, virtual or present, if you could share, when you share your name, if you could share where in the township you reside before you start. Do we have anyone in person? All right, I do see 2 hands raised online. If one of our administrators could facilitate that. We'll start with the person, Lakeisha Green. I think so.
That's right.
Good eye.
Or wait,
I can barely do it. All right, looks like you've been unmuted. Can you hear us?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Keisha Green. I reside in Elkins Park. I have 2 children in the district and 1 who graduated. I am the leader of the Cheltenham High School Band Parent Association. And I think more importantly in this case, the leader of the Cheltenham United Parent Group. And I have a few comments. First, I think it's very refreshing when you hear this type of deep dive and discussion during a board meeting. And I think that dissent ultimately leads to the best solution. So I just applaud the members who were brave enough to kind of speak and state their, their thoughts, even though they didn't, maybe agree with everyone else. So when you're considering the next steps, I just had a few recommendations. First, I would suggest, and I'm wondering if there is any plans to include the viewpoint of child psychologists or other mental health professionals. Second, I would like to recommend or see a discussion of this policy with the PBIS committees at each of the schools to see if they are in agreement or how, what their thoughts are around this policy and if it aligns with PBIS, which my understanding is a key component of the strategic plan, both the previous and the current. Third, I would like to, and I'll say that in researching this, my understanding is that there is a state requirement to report how often seclusion and restraint is being done within the district. And so if that data is not available, it sounds like there is some move to gather data, but I'm just wondering if that means that we have not been in compliance there, or if I am misunderstanding that requirement. And then fourth and finally, I think that a policy should be very clear and easy for the public to understand. And in describing the policy, many of the board members, or not the board members, I think Mr. Diazio, if I'm not mistaken, and also the other gentleman that was virtual, I think his name is Neil. They mentioned some criteria, and I'm just suggesting that some of that language be included. For instance, words like rare, that's nowhere in the policy. It says extraordinary, but if maybe to include some of that wording, Mention of a nurse being present always could be included. Mention of the IEP team being called immediately would be helpful. And then finally, just mention around the periodic review, if that is going to be the case. And ultimately, and mention that the district would like to ultimately move away from the policy of seclusion. So I think that having some of that wording in might be very easy and helpful for parents and those of us who are not, trained in education to understand. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you. And we will move forward to Mrs. Rachel Fishbein. Rachel Ezekiel Fishbein. I did see that. Apologies. Rachel Ezekiel Fishbein.
Hi, thank you. Oh, I don't know how to make my picture come in, so I apologize that you're getting a photo. But I wanted to speak, that I'm Joel's wife, but I also have a son who we pulled out of the district after 3rd grade because of the chaotic environment for him as a student with special needs, and 2 other children who graduated from the district. And I wanted first, if I could have sat here and applauded Jenny when she was speaking, I would have, because she was expressing much of what I was thinking. I appreciate that you're moving in the direction that I think is healthy for our students, but I'm not a big believer in incremental change. And when I heard Dr. Scriven say that to change the policy now would result in chaos, it concerned me because our experience with my son was chaos in our district. And when I heard that the staff is not prepared to become seclusion free yet, I had to wonder if they're actually prepared to implement seclusion appropriately. Because our experience as parents and the experience, and by the way, I was also a co-founder of SNAG. I should have mentioned that. And I've also represented 3 schools that work with children with special needs, one of them that worked to become a trauma-informed school and was the only one in the region that's certified. And our experience was very much that the one-on-one aid, the teacher, even the special ed teachers, and certainly our school principal and our school nurse, were not truly trained in de-escalation. They did not know how to help my son understand what it was that was causing his behavior. They did not know how to help him figure out his triggers. And in fact, they often escalated situations. And because sadly, I hear from parents still who come to me for guidance, I don't see signs that that is necessarily changed. So in all of this conversation, what I wasn't hearing was what training has been done for the educators that are still being allowed to put a child into seclusion, or someone who might be doing restraints, because these are incredibly damaging to the children psychologically, to the other children witnessing it, and it changes the way a child is perceived within the school environment and can make it a situation that is untenable for them. I called my son and told him about this meeting, and what he said to me was, Mom, in my experience, every time I was put somewhere for de-escalation, it actually was a situation that escalated the situation itself for me, so that I was more panicked, more anxious, more out of control, because no one really was trying to support me. I know I've probably taken more time than I should. I want to say one more thing, which is that I'm not hearing about the voices of students and former students and parents in how these policies are being developed. And I'm wondering where those voices are. People like my son, who's now an adult who works in disability advocacy, and many other children I know who have gone through the district, should be being called upon to help develop policy based on their and our experience of the district. So thank you for this time. Thank you, Jenny, for everything you said. And I really look for positive results, but I get nervous when incremental change is discussed, because in my experience, that doesn't happen very often.
Thank you, Mrs. Ezekiel Fishbein. I don't see any other hands raised.
There are 19 candidates.
Oh, but we have 19 Q&As. Thank you for noticing that.
That's what I was terrified.
So has someone already been looking at those, or could we start to at least look at them to see some of them may have been addressed in Dr. Scriven's comments, commitments earlier, but if we could just pull those up.
We have Susan, who has about 10 of the questions.
So usually in the Q&A, we don't read the Q&A because we don't have any ability to know who it's coming from, where they live. It's usually not necessarily a question. Anybody that's giving the Q&A is presumably on the meeting. I don't know that our practice has ever been to read Q&A chat though.
Okay. What do we do?
You want to have her speak?
If she would like to.
We could ask them to speak.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the person's name?
Susan.
Just Susan. Okay, so Susan, and they're still in attendance, Susan, if you're still in attendance, you can let us know if you'd like to just verbally speak to us, to the administration.
Yeah, she's here.
She's here.
Yeah.
Do they need to raise their hand first, or?
Maybe we could
Raise their hand first?
Could we unmute
Here
her?
she is.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
There we
yeah,
go.
perfect.
Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Wing. I have 3 kids in the district. My youngest son, can everyone hear me?
Yes, but could you let us know where in the district you reside, please?
Sure. I'm from Cheltenham.
Thank you.
So my son has an IEP through MCIU, diagnosed as with autism. And he got help, and I advocated for him a lot with one-on-one full-time at his elementary school, and then eventually, cut back to no one-on-one support. So I know most of his behaviors he cannot control. So it's part from, going from preschool, like most preschool wouldn't accept him. So I have to put him through MCIU. So he was with other kids who behave because they cannot control it. So most behaviors, I believe, are learned. So when, so he learned it. So when it's through elementary school, we cut back support, and up to now, his behavior, he still learned the behavior. So he cannot control. I know because I, with him 24/7, and I care for him. So I know like what Ms. Fishbein say, I totally, I definitely know, understand every word she's saying. And fortunately, like because my son was able to successfully complete it through now 5th grade, and I work very closely with his teacher. So when hearing the words seclusion and restraint, as a kid, like it's kind of isolating them from other kids. And being diagnosed as autistic, he socialization wise, he doesn't know how to, like he doesn't initiate to socialize with other kids. So as a mom and I'm with him, of course, seeing him, not be able to interact with other kids or not having friends, it does hurt me a little bit. But he has 2 siblings who he interact with just fine, like around the house and with me, and with, when we're out about, he can ask questions and know what, know how to interact with people. So, I keep all the time telling him, you have to listen to your teacher, tell what the teacher tells you to do, you do it. But sometimes his behavior, he cannot control. So he acts out. So, having that and having to discipline him and restrain him and put in a room, I don't know whether that's the best way. Like Mr. Fishbein said, that is going to be psychologically and emotionally effective. And all the kids seeing, if those policy were to be put in place, he's a very carefree kid, happy kid, carefree kid. And he he can be, he can be talked to listen to, just sometimes he cannot control it. His mind, he cannot control it. I attend one of the session that was held by SIG, and it's developmental is through the brain. It's, that they cannot, with ADHD, I think autistic leading to ADHD is that their brain is underdeveloped. So some of the executive function, they cannot function. So having, more train and how to talk to these kids, I don't know whether we're talking elementary kids or high school kids, but using seclusion and restraint on elementary kids is just excluding them from their peers already, that they already feel excluded. So that's only, what I experienced, and I just want to let all of you know. So hopefully, we can find a solution working with parents. Like, I am always there for my kid, and I'm always, communicate with the teacher, making sure, whatever need to be done, or like I'm always there. So talking to parents is going to be, a way to help the kids by working together with the parents. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. And for our community participation.
Can you actually come back to the public? I know that you went towards there, but I would like to say something.
Okay. Please, if you just share your name, where you live.
Oh, yeah, sure. My name is Sophie McCaffrey. I am a mom to 3 kids that currently hold IEPs within the district. I am also a former student of the district that was pulled in 3rd grade. I also have an IEP. I appreciate the commitment by the district to move towards the direction where we have no seclusion. I also understand the need to take one step at a time to get there. However, what concerns me is in the interim when we are using seclusion, the parents are how they're informed, when they're informed, details, reports, complete transparency. I understand in the moment it goes very quickly and people get, their energy rolling, their blood boiling. However, the damage that it potentially is caused to the child and to the parent, it is concerning and anxiety provoking when you get a phone call that something happened. How the district is addressing it. My children have ADHD. It's not going away. It's with them for the rest of their lives. And in their IEPs, we hold our children to a high standard. We set goals for them. What are the district's goals? And how are we going to get to the point where we don't use seclusion? And how are we going to involve the parents? I sit down 3 times a year at an IEP meeting. I am a member of the team. Parents need to be included in this decision as well. These are our children, and we are entrusting the administration and the teachers to work in tandem with us. And I like to hear that the district is committed to getting to a point where we're not going to use seclusion. But I'm also kind of upset to hear that we're at a point now where we're using practices that I probably wouldn't agree with. And I don't feel confident that as a parent, that I'm just given enough participation in my students' positive behavioral plan. And if something happens to them at school, I want to know about it, and I want all the details. I want transparency. So that's what I have to add. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. And on our record, everybody has up to about 5 minutes, and we generally allow folks to say what they'd like. So no one should feel pressured that you're rushed to share your comments. I'll do another check if anyone else would like to share comments, thoughts. I do see we do have another member of the public. Well, just before we go back there.
I'm Rebecca Condit from Elton Park. One thing that included in the recommendations for students that also occurs to us as parents, like I know, I had no idea, right, as a parent, that seclusion and restraint were things that we did in our district, because I think, like most parents, I get the school handbook from the teacher's school, and I assumed that
everything related to discipline is outlined in that handbook, but I think because these are district-wide policies, there's probably something at the end of the handbook at the beginning that says, and all district-wide policies apply. And I recognize that there's many, many pages of policies out here on the board docs website, and you can't put all of that in every school handbook. But I think, you know, even if we are, and I should have started by saying, thank you for all of the very thoughtful conversation tonight, and everybody engaging in the way that you have and trying to figure out how we could be more the school district that we want to be from where we are right now. That's really, it was very meaningful as a parent to see those conversations happening and know that, you know, that's really great. I lost my train of thought for one moment. Okay, what I was just gonna say is, I think this, in this interim period when we're not at this place, then I think that it needs to actually be in the school handbooks, that this is the thing that can happen, because parents don't know that it's something that can happen. And then when it happens, that just adds a whole nother layer of stigma. Like, my child has done something so whatever, that they had to actually do something that isn't even in the handbook. And it also goes to that transparency piece. And like I said, I know that all the board policies are available here for families, but I think most families, unless they're coming to a lot of board meetings, are probably never looking in that policy area.
Thank you, Ms. Connick. Thank you for sharing. Before Mr. Evans. Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah,
One
and let
more.
me.
Sorry, Mr. Evans.
Sorry,
Mr.
Mr.
Evans. We have one more member of the public.
Sorry, Mr. Evans.
That's okay.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ross Whiting. I live in Elkins Park. I have a son at Myers Elementary as an IEP. I am also an educational researcher and evaluator, and the former inclusive education project manager at the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, and a professor at Summer University working in inclusive education and special education. I have two dissonant thoughts in my head related to this conversation, and they're related to equity. And I know we've talked a great deal, and I've heard the board talk thoughtfully a great deal about the way that they approach this work. And this is, in my view, at its core, an issue related to equity at the heart. And I'm holding in my head the idea that seclusion is an outdated piece of residual practice that we're using in our district, reflective of our need to change practice in the future. And seclusion, literally, for all of you, we all talk about inclusion. Seclusion is literally the opposite of inclusion. And just using that as our guiding star as we think about like what we as a community want for our schools and for our students who have experienced that. And at the same time, recognizing what Dr. Scriven said, which is essentially that we need to engage and invest in more trauma-informed practice, which requires intensive training, knowledge, investment in the situation so that our teachers, our educators, our paraprofessionals, our staff know and understand what they should be doing in those situations. That requires organizational thought and commitment to that, which I hear from Dr. Scriven. I hear that commitment from you. But the background of that needs to be built towards the future. And so these are dissonant ideas. Like they are incongruent ideas to hold these two things. It's clear that we are not satisfied with the status quo, but also that we want to move towards this future. And so I encourage the board to look at things like the Healing Centered Schools Initiative in the state of New Jersey that really put together a lot of information about ways that students can be supported and reduce seclusion to zero. More trauma-informed practices that recognize that behavior is just the expression of an unmet need in the classroom, and it is communication. And so thinking about those things as guiding lights, I know we're looking for a special education coordinator. Bless you, I hope that person is excellent because they have a lift ahead of them. We have a lot of work to do in this district, and I thank you for the time to talk.
Appreciate that. And, you know, I don't speak on behalf of, but I believe the comments that we heard earlier speaks to a lot of what we are hearing from our members of the public. And so, Mr. Evans.
Yes, thank you. And let me apologize again because my sound keeps on coming in and out. So hopefully I can get this through. Just real quickly, just so I want to assure the board and the community, with strong support from Dr. Scriven and Dr. Smith, we are starting to look at our programs. We had the PTAN, the Pennsylvania Teaching and Training program, come out to look at our autistic support programs today. There's a program that they run, which is a year-long program that we've applied for. And we're also looking with consultants to look at our emotional support program. So we have started some the process of looking at our programs and which would include the seclusion process, to start looking at best ways to provide the best support for our students.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Yes.
So this is our first item. It is not the only item on the agenda. But yeah, I'll go back to admin or Mr. Diazio.
So what I heard is we'll move this policy to a second reading with the understanding that an AR will be developed and shared back with the committee at the next policy meeting.
Correct. So we'll still move forward with this for adoption at the next legislative.
And can I ask, because I know that there are going to be some changes made to the policy itself based on this conversation, could we send out a deadline to policy? Because I think that way we can see the changes. And as we always do with policies, make that draft policy also available to the public prior to the legislature, as we always do.
So if we're going to move this to second reading, there wouldn't be a lot of change to this current policy. What I heard was we were going to put the training language about the space, language about, to Mr. Schultz's point, providing context to parents, follow-up reporting, all of that was going to be in the AR.
Okay, and will we also put in the AR intention to kind of move to excluding seclusion and restraint?
We can certainly do that, yes.
So that can be in the AR.
I think that should go to purpose.
Okay.
Of the policy.
Of the policy.
Yes.
That we can add.
Marvelous. But yeah, because in some ways it is there. So, but yeah, so that is our first item of business or old business. And so is there more coming?
No, I just was going to ask you to take something out of order on the agenda when you come.
Okay, yeah, because that's where I was going. If there's something we could prioritize and possibly reserve the rest.
So Ms. Keene, Director of Student Services, is here to talk about the attendance policy. And I don't think that policy will take too long. So if we could take that item out of order, I think that might be helpful and efficient.
All right. And do we need, thanks members of the public for attending. Do we need a motion to do that? Given it's all this new business, we just go right to it.
You're fine.
All right. So then let's just. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so we're going to start with our new business. We're going to move forward with a piece that's on our new business agenda, policy and AR 204 for attendance. And I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, so policy 204 is the attendance policy. The policy is very simple. But where we're going to look primarily is in the AR. So I'm going to scroll through this and just point out a couple changes. The real reason that we brought the policy under review, Ms. Keene and her team noted that the compulsory school age needed to be updated. Previously, the compulsory school age in Pennsylvania was 8 to 17. It's now 8 to 17. It's now 6 to 18. We needed to make that change throughout. And through the student services review of this policy, we did make a few minor changes. We added family court to the reasons for excused absence. we added some clarifying language in the regulation about how tardiness is quantified for purposes of determining truancy per state code. And those were the major changes. The exemption from compulsory attendance language was expanded consistent with school code. So those are the major changes. If there's any questions about EAR, I'm sure Ms. Keen or I can address them.
Thanks. I'll open it up to the board for comments. Mrs. Haywood?
Just a question regarding the sequence. So if a student is late consecutive days or without an excuse, that could lead to a student being truant from school, correct?
Correct.
And then ultimately, could that lead to that student being considered to be unexcused absences from school? That could then ultimately lead to reporting them to the court. Or is that sequence incorrect?
So if you're out of school unexcused for the day, that would count as a day towards, that would count as a day of unexcused absence. If you have a number of latenesses to school that are unexcused, the time that you're late is totaled, converted to school days. And whenever you reach 3 school days per state code, you would be considered truant. Now, there's a significant amount of support that Student Services Office provides to families through the social workers to make sure that the consequences are not punitive and that we work with families. The state law on reporting truancy is pretty strict. We have to send a notice of truancy out at 3 days or shortly thereafter. We're required to explain to families all of the potential consequences if your child becomes habitually truant. Some of those things are very punitive, but we're required to communicate them. But the team works very hard to make sure that, again, we're supporting families to understand why their students are absent from school and implement supports that are needed to help them return.
Thanks for that. Other members of the board? None. I'll open it up to, Mr. Burdell-Williams.
Just the essence of the update around compulsory school days change. I think we talked about that in at least 1 or 2 other policies from maybe a year or less ago. Just wondering if there's been like a kind of wholesale overview of our policies to ensure that change is.
I think we've got them all now.
Okay.
So it was our enrollment policy. It was probably the admission of beginners policy, and then it would be the attendance policy. So I think we've got them all. I will double check the withdrawal from school policy. That would be the one other one to look at, but we'll take a look at that.
I appreciate that. I just, day job in the regulatory environment, when things happen, ensuring that they are applied equitably and across all boards, like really hard to do. So
thank you for that.
Just the nudge.
I appreciate it.
We should probably do. So thank you.
Thanks. We'll open it up, move to comments from members of the public on policy 204, attendance. Seeing no hands are raised. Did any more questions come through? I see that's still at 20, so no. So,
No.
yeah.
Nope.
All right. That is one of our new business, so that will move forward for a first read at our next legislative meeting. Any others that we want to
and maybe one more, while I don't know that we'll need Ms. Keen for the home education policy, which is 136. Her office does oversee home education, so it might be, I think most of the changes are legal changes that I can address, but maybe we could take that one just in case.
We don't have a motion, so we can keep going until we get some motion. So yeah, home education, which is, so yes, I'll hand it back over to admin for 136.
Okay, so home education, which many folks know as homeschool, is the district's policy 136. There were changes to the state law back in 2022 that go into effect for the 23-24 school year that provide home education students a right to come to the district schools for up to 25% of their day to take advantage of curricular programs, extracurricular and co-curricular programs, and career technical education programs. So that's a shift. In the past, school districts were permitted to permit that type of dual enrollment, but weren't required to. So what you're seeing here is actually some revisions to policy 136 and the AR, which we'll take a look at, but there's actually 3 new policies proposed. One titled 136.1, which discusses extracurricular programs, one which is 136.2, which addresses access to co-curricular activities and academic courses, and 136.3, which discusses entitlement to participation in career and technical education programs. So they all fall with under 136, but they're separated out into 3 different policies in this case. So let me take a look at, I don't believe that 136 changed very much. The only procedures that were, that there are some red lines in here, and these red lines are simply taking provisions of the home education law, which have been in effect for many years, and making sure they're properly incorporated. So there's nothing new about the AR 136. Let me just get to the end and confirm that. That's right. So what you're going to see is 136.1, which talks about students having the ability to participate in extracurricular programs. 136.2, which talks about co-curricular activities and academic courses, and 136.3, which talks about enrollment in career and technical education programs. We specifically call out the Eastern Center in the policy. What this will require, maybe to Mr. Burdell Williams' point a moment ago, the district's interscholastic athletics and extracurricular activities policy will need to be updated, and they are very likely going to be on the agenda for the proposed agenda for next month for the committee to take a look at.
All right, opening up for comments from the board on 136. Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, this is a question around 136 itself. And I think it might be in the AR related to program/compliance. There's some language around if the superintendent, I think it's new language, if the superintendent has a reasonable belief, et cetera, et cetera. What, could you give me a little bit of, before I ask my question, a little bit of context around the school district's responsibility to ensure that students who are homeschooled are receiving an education? And what would trigger, is this the language that explains what could trigger our evaluation of that responsibility?
So at the beginning of every year, families have to submit an affidavit outlining the content of the program, who's going to be overseeing the program, what students are going to be enrolled, verification that the subjects that are required by law to be taught are being taught, things like that. At the end of the year, the home education program supervisor, which is frequently the parent, is required by law to go out and get a certification by an external professional, an external evaluator, to look at the work that was performed during that school year and to verify that an appropriate education was taking place. During the school year, if for any number of reasons information comes to the attention of the district that a program may not be operating according to the affidavit that was submitted, we don't have to wait till the end of the year until the evaluator's certificate comes in. We do have the ability during the year to ask questions and to require the home education supervisor to submit sort of proof or verification that an appropriate education is taking place. Sometimes just very putting it out there very transparently. Sometimes I have seen cases where families will enroll their child in a home education program because they don't want to come to the public school system for one reason or another, and they will sometimes very overtly share that they're not performing any education at home, and very little education is taking place. Sometimes it's not as overt as a statement like that. It's not rare that during the year these circumstances come up, but every once in a while they do come up.
Thank you. And part of my concern is these are students who might not be attending our school district, but are under, the equity statement that we believe in still applies to these students, I believe. And I wonder what we can do to that third party that evaluates whether effective education is occurring at the home. Is that, do we have any influence over who that is to ensure that they're actually performing a legitimate evaluation?
The family gets to, the family gets to select that evaluator. There are some requirements in the law about some just general educational credentials that those folks have to have. And the home education, I'm going to get the group wrong, but like the Home Education Society for the Commonwealth, which is a group that many home education parents find as a source of support, does put forth, at least they did pre-pandemic, I assume they do now, they do put forth a list of potential evaluators who do this quite frequently around the state.
And I imagine a lot of this is very much regulated. We don't have too much ability to go beyond what's determined.
Correct. We do work with families. We do interface with these families quite a bit because they're able to request textbooks from the district. If there are special education services that are being requested that the district consider providing, they can make those requests. Now there's going to be an ability by law, by right, to come into the district for up to 25% of the day to participate in extracurricular and co-curricular activities. So it's envisioned that I think home education students are going to have more direct contact with the school district as time moves forward than previously.
And that would then be an example of where the superintendent might have reasonable belief, because I'm having trouble understanding under what circumstances the superintendent would develop reasonable belief of a student that doesn't interface with the school district. Thank you. I think that some of my concerns don't have solutions under the law, and we can't explore them, so I'm not going to belabor this any longer at this meeting, but thank you all for letting me ask them.
Did I miss anything, Ms. Keen, or?
How many students, just out of curiosity, how many families or students do we have that are approved on that programs?
I do not know that number. There is a spreadsheet, and I will send you the information with the exact number.
I'm curious because on my own block, we've got 20 children who are homeschooled.
Oh, and don't confuse homeschool with cyber school.
No, they're homeschooled. Their mom has like a sticker on her car. See me if you want to homeschool your child.
And I do want to clarify, I'm not trying to come at homeschool. I've just, anecdotally, I heard about a family in the district that had very different approaches in homeschooling their young girls versus their young boys, and they didn't educate their young girls, and that broke my heart. And I wanted to understand if there are things that we can do to help prevent that type of thing from occurring. And it sounds like the answer is essentially no, unless we catch one. I mean, these are now old enough that I don't think it would even apply for this, but.
Can I just interject?
Yes.
from Mr. Diazio's explanation, it sounds like we do have some checks and balances here.
Yes, but how would we have learned about that?
Initiate.
How do we initiate the process of understanding proactively with a family that might not have sent, might not send certain kids to participate in the school district's activities, and so we really would have no interfacing. I just don't know.
Somebody made a report, kind of like, there's a child at the bus stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. It would take years, I suppose. Thanks.
Any other board directors? This topic, no. We'll move to members of the public on this policy 136 on home education.
No, there's no.
We have one in person.
So if someone was being homeschooled, a child was being homeschooled, then under this policy, would there then be like the possibility that they might come in and get some kind of special education service for part of the day?
So that is a topic that is still being explored. The law does talk about how a student's day would not get reorganized around specific supports. The access is to the curricular programs that already exist. But the law already does permit, first of all, we will have obligations under the ADA and under Section 504 to provide access to our programs. So if students have a disability that falls under 504 or the ADA, we would have to provide access to our programs. In terms of IDEA FAPE obligations, the district doesn't have a FAPE obligation to those students, but there is an ability to provide certain special education services if they can fit within the curricular options that student selects. The logistics of that are still, it's being talked about statewide about how special education and student services directors are going to implement that. But it's a great question.
And Ms. Jackson, you were saying we don't have any, or those two questions, I see two new ones, but.
They're older.
They're old. Those
Yep.
are two questions from Marilyn Thompson, who I didn't know, she didn't say she wanted to speak.
Okay.
I just left them.
All right, so thank you. We can keep it going. Some of these policies are, because we go, yeah, if we go back to old business, some of these policies are straightforward. So again, hearing no motion, we can go back to old business and for 011, principles for governance and leadership, I'll hand that back over to administration.
And we can go one by one through each of these, or since they are all second readings, 011, 828, 709, 236, 827, 825, and 920 have not changed since the first board meeting. So we don't have to necessarily take each one individually. If any board member or member of the community wants to comment on any item, we can take them out of order. Otherwise, if the committee wants to move them forward, we can move them forward as a group, if that would help.
Ms. Mulhern, did you have?
Yeah, I had a question, I'm just pulling it up now, about 920. I thought at the last council meeting we had discussed, and maybe that was added, that's what I'm looking at now, examples of not, we talked about what was a school organization and what wasn't.
Yes.
And that looks like it has been addressed.
Yes, that was included prior to the first reading.
Okay, I just wanted to know.
And we did clarify that non-school organizations include groups like UPG, SEEG, and what else did we add? Yes, parent-teacher organizations, little leagues, all of those types of groups that interface with the district in a non-district capacity.
Ms. Woman?
I'm sorry, I wasn't here at the last policy meeting, so I apologize for, just a comment on, 011. The principles for governance. The evaluate continuously, conduct a board self-assessment on a recurring basis. Would it be tough to make that on an annual basis? Because we do something, do we say something else is gonna happen on an annual basis in this policy? Oh, well, superintendent.
That'll be up to us to make sure that we follow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this language was taken from the PSBA principles that were approved, with the caveat that we did make a change to affirmatively address equity, even though the statewide principles don't address equity currently.
So is that a request that we say we're gonna do an annual?
Consider that, yeah,
So
yeah.
to change the current. Mr. Schultz?
Related to that, I'm just thinking through, and Julie, is the cadence we've done that in the past every other year, or has it been
For the PSBA governance principles?
for the self-assessment? And the reason I ask is to some extent, the self-assessment takes time. It involves a meaningful chunk of the board retreat to go over, and it usually results in some action items, which might take in themselves some amount of time to execute on and translate to goals. And I'm not against annual. I just wanted to raise the question of would prescribing annual versus biannual, or versus
I don't
regular.
think we've done it on an annual basis. I mean, I think that's up to the board whether we want to do that. And I do agree that it does take some time to do it. It does take some time to evaluate the assessment after it's done and then determine what action items we want to take.
I do wonder if, so that was all. I'm not against, I think it's very important to regularly not being just a fake word, but actually saying, yes, we do expect this to be part of our DNA. But I also wonder if annual might be more often than is useful. The similar question, though, is there anything on here, and I apologize I know we want to adopt this, but around board goals, which might also be something that's useful.
So just think of this as kind of a template for generating. I think that's the last retreat. That's how we utilize the self-assessment. And we look at these particular categories and said, how could we then translate those in the categories that we needed to work on? I would prioritize those as board goals. So I know that Ms. Henry has been working with some board members to generate some goals around these principles.
Right.
Any others on any of our old business items?
So just back to Ms. Bowman's
Okay, yeah.
question, we want to say on at least biannual basis.
And do we want, not, it's biannual because it can mean once a year or every other year, we might want to specify.
Every other year.
Every other year. Yeah.
If not, just a reminder, we have a number of policies under old business. We have already discussed 113.2 in terms of behavior support. If there are any others that members of the public would like to address, again, under old business, we will open the floor to do that now.
So there's no hands raised. No
Our-
Q&As.
Our agendas and all materials are available online for your review in advance of these meetings. So we will, we have one more policy on our agenda under new business, policy 127, assessment of educational program. I'll hand it back over to administrator.
Yes, so policy 127, we're finding this with a couple of the older policies. The old language was dropped in as a text file or a picture file as opposed to a text file. So it gets very, very complicated to edit them. So you're seeing the language struck and new language dropped in. This is a pretty broad policy just around assessment, essentially. It talks about the board approving, which the assessment system every 6 years. It talks about parents having the right to review statewide assessments. There's a cross-reference to the policy that talks about the procedure for exempting students from those assessments. And then just talks about the different ways under the delegation of responsibility that the district engages stakeholders to review its programs. There was a lot of customized language in this policy that back in 2016, the board asked to be included, language about looking at, for example, the last sentence of the delegation here about making sure that we look holistically, that metrics that we're using are not culturally biased. All of that language was specific language that this committee 7 years ago asked to put in. I did do a cross-reference between the old language and the new language to make sure that all of the previously Cheltenham-specific language made its way into this new draft.
Opening up floor for comments from board directors.
So this is about both local and state assessments, this policy. It's not just about local assessments.
Correct.
Can we is there a way to sort of specify that? That would be my recommendation. When I read it, I thought it was just about like the district assessment, but then I realized it was also about the state assessment. Not that it makes that much of a difference, but
We could put in the purpose, the board recognizes its responsibility to develop and implement a state and local assessment system.
yeah, something, yeah, thank you. I was just wasn't sure.
Any other comments from the board? Members of the public, policy 127.
There's no hands.
All right, so as a quick check, we have a number of our old business policies. All of them will move forward for consideration for adoption at our next legislative board meeting. And then the 3 policy items and in our new business will move forward for a first read at our next legislative meeting. And our next policy committee meeting is Tuesday, April 25th, 2023 at 7 p.m. Same.
Yeah, it should be the 25th. It was an error.
Okay. I was like, wait a second. Yeah, so that'll be our next policy committee meeting. Am I missing anything?
That is a joint meeting of Educational Affairs and Policy Committee to discuss the homework policy.
Thank you. So what Mr. Diazzo just said, members of the public, please do feel free to attend. With that, I'll await a motion to adjourn for tonight.
Second.
You have a second? All right, that means we are adjourned. Thank you.